Well, this is different. Minecraft Story Mode, there's an arc where the heroes get trapped in a seemingly infinite hallway of portals that lead to other worlds, all with different themes, threats, and things to encounter. My last big video essay was all about this game, and when I got to this part, I mentioned how this premise very slightly reminded me of something I've played before. Advent of Ascension. This is a Minecraft mod created by Zolova, though as far as I can tell it's currently being developed by a completely different team led by T-Slat. It's a mod that adds a lot, to be perfectly honest, though the most notable new feature being the inclusion of about 20 all-new dimensions. Think like the Nether in the end, like there's just way more of stuff like that in the game now. All of them have wildly different themes, loot, and challenges to find. I'm not a modding guy per se, but after a good friend Pajaman got me into it, something about this one in particular really hooked me back when I played it for the first time in 2020, and this year as well. And I kind of want to talk about it in a big video like this. So here's what I'm going to do. A tier list. Pretty basic format, though I promise this is going to be one of those tier list videos that actually has some effort put into it. I'm going to be analyzing the many dimensions of this mod, talking about things I like, things I dislike, maybe some interesting trivia if I happen to know it. A couple of caveats before we start though. 1, these are my opinions. 2, I am currently playing this version of this mod. This is one of those mods that seems to always be in development, so the farther away from this day I'm starting this video you're watching, and the farther away from this video's publication you're watching it, the more likely some of these points I bring up will be irrelevant. Though even if this video is super dated, I hope it's entertaining all the same. 3, I'm not your average Minecraft player. In a bad way? Maybe. I play Minecraft very differently from most people. For one, I play with keep inventory on. Oh, come on! I'm also not above using cheats or swapping to creative mode to skip absolute busy work or forgo mechanics I find annoying. These factors will likely affect how much I like these dimensions, although I'll still try to be fair about it. 4, this video is for entertainment purposes. I'm going to be complaining a lot sometimes in this video, but I should mention that I'll be mostly exaggerating because it's funny to do so. I'll also be talking a lot about things I think would be cool to have in this mod. Again, this is mostly for entertainment purposes, and I have no expectations of anything I mention to be seriously added. But if by chance a developer does watch this and happen to like anything I mention, I would not have any issues whatsoever with you straight up stealing my ideas. Number 5, this skin is not a fursona. This is a character named Galloway. He's this opossum from a game I was working on but put on hiatus. And this is a skin of him made by a good friend Computer vs. World. Go follow her Tumblr. The skin is adorable and I absolutely love using it, but this character is not a fursona. I've had people assume that before. I want to make that clear. If you are curious though, this is my fursona. Yeah, I came out as a furry this year. I am a light blue Bomberman Louie with Dream Eater aesthetic and ice magic. So, alrighty then, let's go ahead and jump into this. So, a question you're going to be asking yourself starting this is how exactly do you access these new dimensions? When you start a new playthrough, you're just kind of dropped into a world that feels like normal Minecraft, barring some new enemies and a level up system and some new ores. The first step is to find one of these, a ruined teleporter frame. They're found underground and aren't too rare, although it took me hours to find one in my world, to a point in which I eventually peeked into spectate mode just to find one. Again, I'm not above cheating. Once you've found one, you need to talk to this ghost to give him some food, and he'll give you a book with instructions on how to access other dimensions. You do so by taking these rocks and making a frame out of them, almost like another portal, but way more complicated. Although there are these 5 separate rune rocks you also need, and the positions you place them in the frame is specific, and finding them can be a little grindy, and there's one that needs to be crafted for some reason. Okay, this part's a little annoying. When you look into the book, a little object will fall out, a realm stone. Hi, Moja, how you doing? Hey, you guys ever met Moja the Minecraft llama? When you look in the book, a little object will fall out, a realm stone. These things look suspiciously like those orbs that give you magic in Shepherdmancer, by the way, the game I made a few years back, way before I played this mod. Like, it's absolutely a coincidence. I just think it's kind of funny. These things are interesting. Basically, by completing certain tasks while holding a realm stone in your hand, It will convert the Realm Stone into the Realm Stone of a particular dimension depending on what criteria you just fulfilled, and then you can use that stone on a portal to activate it. These tasks can be quite random, honestly, although the game does straight up just tell you how to acquire them. The real challenge is actually doing them. So at this point, it might be worth mentioning the tier system of the game. There are about 20 dimensions, but you can't just access them in any order you want. There are 4 tiers to these dimensions, more or less ranking them in terms of how dangerous they are. You must access at least some dimensions of a lower tier to access ones of a higher one. And basically how they do this is by making the tasks to acquire the Realm Stone of later game dimensions involve elements from previous ones. For example, acquiring the Iromine dimension, a tier 2 dimension, involves the use of a mineralization station, which is a block you can only find in a tier 1 dimension. I kind of wish there was a way to go out of order for a few of these. It could make speedruns or challenge runs more interesting, although going by things the devs have talked about in the mod's Discord, I get the impression that this would be very against the artistic intention of the mod, which is totally understandable. Also, hi again, Moja. It's a pretty smart design choice too, because from what I remember, I think older versions did let you access dimensions in just about any order you wanted, which led to players accidentally visiting ones that are way too dangerous for the point in the game they are, as well as just being confusing in general by giving them too many options. So anyway, obviously we're going to be looking at some tier 1 dimensions first, and we have 5 options. I'm going to be talking about Precasia to start. It's the first one I accessed, as its Realm Stone requires you to craft a blank stone with one of each sapling in the game. Also, do you want something? Can I help you? Get out of here. Hey! And given my affinity for auto bamboo smelters, I inevitably do a lot of exploring for a jungle early on, and therefore are exploring enough to actually have everything I need to make this quite easily. This is a dimension based on an unspecified prehistoric time, complete with dinosaurs, enormous trees, huge insects, and lots of fossils. It's actually a pretty great first impression to the mod, in my opinion. If you're playing this yourself, I'd actually recommend doing this world first, if only for the skeleton tools, which make bones randomly drop when you mine stuff. Yeah, do you like your trees of bones? You get that with this mod. These bones you can use to make bone meal, which is always useful, especially early on. Also, Moshe is moving so much that I can't reliably look at the camera and read my script at the same time. You can also make skeletal ingots with them, which can be used to make an early game armor with a pretty decent special effect. You can also make the Bone Blaster. Yes, this mod adds guns as well. Also, the free cam mod I'm doing will crash the game if I fire this with items that are not vanilla, so you cannot see this in action, unfortunately. Download the mod yourself, play this. Whenever you visit a new dimension, some things you'll definitely want to watch out for are structures containing unique loot, ores, and enemies, some of which themselves can drop items of interest. This world introduces a total of 11 enemies, which is actually quite huge. I'd even wager to bet that it's the most to be featured in a single world. Given the overwhelming majority of them are melee mobs, which is a little boring and something I'll touch on later, but the huge variety in shapes and sizes for them all makes up for it here. Some favorites being the Dinotherium, an elephant-like monster notable mostly for its size, the giant snail, which is a lot faster than you'd expect it to be, but also leaves a trail of slime behind it that can damage you. A neat twist on what would normally be a pretty generic monster. And the Sabertooth is just adorable. I can't say there are many contenders in this mod for cutest mob, but this is definitely one of them. Like, this thing is adorable. There are also 2 bosses to this dimension, which... Okay, I've been mulling over how I'm going to handle talking about the bosses in this video because I have very mixed feelings on them. I think I've decided that I'm simply not going to really mention or, have them affect the rating at all. Here's the thing, this mod adds a bunch of bosses, typically 2 per dimension, although I'm personally not the biggest fan of the bosses. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that they're consistently my least favorite thing about this mod. Just about all of them are either really frustrating, or take too long, or too easy to cheese. I swear there's two of them that are actually fun to fight, and it's these two. No hyperbole, if I were to factor bosses into my grading for how much I enjoyed these dimensions, a good half of them would go down, like, at least a full rank. I'm not even kidding, they're that unenjoyable to me. For the time being, I think it's best to just ignore them for now. Something cool that can spawn the dimension are the Caillou temples, giant pyramids filled with traps. There's also these underground dens, and these nests spawn Archaeopteryx monsters. There's a ton of variety here overall. It was an amazing first impression to this playthrough. I'll be putting this in the extremely fun to explore tier. Okay, let's get off of you now. Oh my goodness, you are annoying. Our next dimension is the Deeplands. The gimmick to this one being that it is an enormous... Moshe, stop! The gimmick to this one being that it is an enormous cavern. Now, that might not sound very special, especially with caves and cliffs being a thing now, but I think it's worth noting that this area was a thing before that big update, so it's actually quite original. Now, this is a dimension I have mixed feelings on. I like it overall. I think it's fun to explore. It has a pretty unique aesthetic for being just a cave, and some of its loot is fun too. I feel this is a dimension that really eases you into the more unique elements of this mod as a whole, and I praise it a lot for that. On the other hand, okay, I'm just going to start with the color palette. It's gray. It is way too damn gray. The walls are gray, the floors are gray, the loot is gray, the enemies are gray, the boss is gray. A dimension having a unifying color that really ties everything together is a pretty common and good thing to have, but gray is such a neutral color to begin with that it has this effect of homogenizing a lot of what would otherwise be pretty unique elements. I couldn't tell you the difference between these two items, like I'm not even kidding. My other big issue with this dimension are its enemies. They not only look the same, but they also act the same too. This is actually an issue I have with a lot of this mod, to be fair. So many enemies have this near identical melee AI where they just charge at you relentlessly. I love a game with a big, unique, and memorable cast of enemies. Characters that mechanically challenge you, ask you for different types of strategies, and can be picked out at a glance as they stick in your memory your entire playthrough. Minecraft itself is actually a really good example of this. Every enemy has just enough about them to make them unique and fresh, but never enough that they feel overwhelming to fight. It also allows them to be paired in interesting ways too, making for all sorts of combinations that require different strategies, priorities, and approaches. In Advent of Ascension, the only thing half these enemies ever do is walk towards you in a straight line. There's no strategy. All you ever need to do is continually walk backwards and hit the closest enemy. Or you could just place some water down, or make a ring of fences, or you could even just pillar 2 blocks up to effectively hard counter an unreasonable amount of foes. Even several bosses fall victim to this. Now, I gotta say that I don't have an issue with melee enemies in this game in general, but how they're handled here feels very poorly thought out. It even makes me wonder what the point of having this many monsters across the entire mod is in the first place, when they all act nearly identical like this. It even brings this problem where the only way to effectively make areas harder is through raw enemy spam, which this mod does engage in quite a bit, to be perfectly honest. And unless you're making a YouTube thumbnail, enemy spam is kinda boring. How you make melee monsters like this more interesting is by varying how they approach you, or by giving them some sort of reaction to taking damage. Heck, there's actually a few rare examples of this in this mod, like the Fungebacks, which release toxic spores when hit, instantly forcing you to consider your surroundings when fighting it. Or the Zargs, which create copies of a weaker enemy that can't deal or take damage, but have a hitbox which can mess with your aim, and confuse you as to what your immediate vicinity is actually a threat. I wish there was more stuff like that in this game. Heck, as an example for some cool ideas for this dimension alone, what if some enemies could potentially magnetize you towards them? There's also this enemy called the Case Construct that drops a rare item when killed. What if it ran away from you instead of trying to chase you down like every other enemy? It would... Moshe, stop. It would create these instances where you charge through other monsters to get to it, potentially putting yourself in danger for the sake of a rare item. Could be interesting. And speaking of interesting, this is one of those dimensions that used to have a very different terrain generation. Yeah, this mod has been in development for a very long time, so a lot of, like, dimensions have been changed very radically, and the Deeplands used to be much more open, and with these black trees all over the place. Personally, for as annoying as cavernous terrain can be to navigate, I actually prefer the change they made in, like, the newer versions of this mod. It feels more like an actual cave, though I do kind of miss the black trees. They kind of look cool, and I kind of wish they could be brought back. Overall, this dimension is fine. There's something cool to explore here, although there's also a lot that's underwhelming. I'll put it in the I like it, but something is missing tier. Our next dimension is Barathos. The wiki describes this place as a desert wasteland, which kind of sounds like it would be boring to explore. I mean, how interesting can you make a desert with barely anything? Well, there's actually quite a lot going on here. Hi, Moja. First off, it's the first dimension I explored where I actively started looking out for a structure, as opposed to just checking out whatever I found. The Baron Castles. They're quite small, but the first cluster I ran into had some items I found incredibly useful. You can also find the Mineralization Station here, an incredibly useful block that lets you transmute your unwanted ores and gemstones into coins, which are basically a currency that all NPCs in this game take. Also, it's kind of fun to just run through these castles, avoiding all enemies as best you can, and then just drilling out the side once you got all the loot. It's a good feeling, and kind of a strategy that works for a little too many of the structures, to be perfectly honest. It's kind of comical just how many structures can be cheesed just by mining through them or building over them, but I digress. The enemies here are pretty cool too. It's another dimension where they're mostly melee mobs, although at least they all look distinct at a glance this time. Seriously, it's cool how they all fit the area aesthetically, despite how many colors they use. It might be because they tend to be more pastel colors, making them look dusty in a way. There's even a couple with some interesting nuances to them, like the Emperor Beast, that has a huge knockback effect and gives you a nauseous effect as well. My headcanon is that this thing hits you so hard that it gives you a concussion. I mean, it certainly looks painful when you get blown back. There's also an interesting passive enemy here that has natural spikes. And underground, you can find these rare enemies called the Squigglers. If at any point you are in its line of sight, you are set on fire. That is interesting. It makes them a pretty notable priority enemy. Oh yeah, the underground too. Okay, this underground kind of confuses me a little. So above the surface, it's a pretty cool desert. But below, it's kind of hell-themed for some reason. There's tons of stuff on fire, the blocks you mine are called Hellstone, the mobs are more hellish, and there's even a hell-themed ore you can find down here. The second theming to this dimension feels a little out of place. There's already a hell dimension in Minecraft naturally, and it pulls off everything you can do with that theme like it incredibly well, making these generic caves feel a little redundant. Especially since all the hell part of this dimension amounts to is just random caves of a red coat of paint. I don't know, I feel like anything interesting you wanted to do down here would be more appropriate to move to the Nether proper. This mod actually does add a ton of original stuff to the Nether, though I'm not covering in this video. I just want to bring that up because, like, there is a precedence for that. And then maybe you could rework the underground areas of Barathos to work with, like, the desert theming a little bit better. Heck, a thought that comes to mind is maybe catacombs? There's clearly some kind of monarchy vibe to this dimension too, with the existence of the Baroness, which I know I said I wasn't going to talk about bosses, though she was easily like one of my favorite fights in the game, and the only one I really want to learn more about. She's the only humanoid in this entire dimension, and it just got me curious what her deal was. What is she the Baron of? What happened to her subjects? Have they died? Have they left to other dimensions? Have they turned into the monsters? Maybe her kingdom has been long dead and the reason she's here is because she's some kind of zombie or immortal. Like, I don't know, I feel like there has to be a lot of hidden lore to this character and I just kind of want to learn more. She's very interesting based off what little I know about her. So overall, I like this dimension. I'm adding it to the fun to explore tier. Our next dimension is Lelyetia? I think that's how you say it. And you know what? I like this one too. For starters, it's got a really cool aesthetic, being very autumny while also feeling somewhat alien. These freakishly tall trees tipped with white leaves are just called cores for some reason. Really makes an impression. Not to mention the veiny foliage that just looks uncomfortable to be around. Remember when I criticized the Deeplands for, while making a neat choice in making all parts of its world one general color scheme, doing so poorly due to picking such a neutral color? This dimension is a much better example of how to pull this off well. Its floral and fauna are so oppressively orange, yet still stick out from one another. This even extends to the enemies, and even beyond that, I quite like the enemies here. First off, I think we have our first honest-to-God ranged unit, the Lelyetia casters. They're often paired with the melee mob, the Lelyetia warrior, for a nice 1-2 combo of classic enemy formation tropes. Moshe, can you please calm down? They got these weird four-eyed flies, too. You know, something about the enemies of this dimension just also look incredibly alien to me. Everything has either multiple heads or an abnormal amount of eyes. These two in particular make me wonder if there's even supposed to be some sort of civilization here, and as they're clearly more humanoid than everything else. Eventually I got bored of the surface and began burrowing to see if I could find anything underground. It was here that I discovered that the world is mirrored on the bottom. The underside of this world is an exact copy of the top half, with trees growing downwards. It's super cool to find, but I just don't know what it really adds to the world. Like, why would you go down here? Like, ever? Aside from these two structures, nothing really spawns down here. It's a pain in the butt to traverse. Heck, it's even hard to see due to how dark it is. But then I look at how prominently the wiki, mentions this feature of the world, and the realm stone is even called the flipped realm stone in, the achievement, and then I realize that this is supposed to be a defining feature of the world, isn't it? Oh, hey, rain. I mean, it looks cool, but it's not really super interesting as of right now. Maybe this will be something that'll be added upon in future updates. I don't know why, but my first thought is to maybe make the underside an inverse in terms of hostility as well, as opposed to just the generation of it. The upper half has a ton of monsters, but is easy to run through, while the bottom half is peaceful with no monsters, but is treacherous to traverse. There exist friendly NPCs in this dimension, which I think is the first time I'm mentioning them in this video. Yeah, occasionally you can find villages and banks and lotto men who will trade you for various items. What if, to emphasize this, the structures friendly NPCs spawn in would only spawn in the bottom half? Maybe they could even have flipped gravity, too. I don't know why, but doing trades with villagers when they're upside down and you're right side up, I think would be a pretty memorable part of the game if something like that were ever implemented. Also, maybe make it easier to tell that the underside area exists in the first place. It could be as easy as tweaking the world generation so more holes appear. Overall, I enjoy this dimension, although the underdeveloped underside left a lot to be desired for me. I'm adding it to the fun to explore but missing something tier. And the final tier 1 dimension is Creeponia. Anyway, I'm going to jump ahead here and tell you that this is the first dimension in the bottom tier, the I don't want to go back tier. I'm not the biggest fan of Creeponia, although I don't think it's necessarily because of the world itself. Between you and me, I'm actually not the biggest fan of creepers. What? How does that even happen? Okay, hear me out. The enemy design of Minecraft is generally fantastic and something I think tends to get overlooked. They all look unique, are interesting, and distinct from one another. They have unique creative intricacies and battle methods. Heck, even ones that tend to be disliked, I sometimes find myself enjoying quite a bit. Like, the Phantom's kind of a notorious one. Like, I joke with my friends all the time about how much I love the Phantoms, but, everyone else hates it for some reason. These things aren't that hard to deal with. They're just super fun to fight. I don't know, man. Of every enemy in this game, though, none has ever caused me more frustration than the Creeper. Ever since I first played this game back in 2010, this has consistently been my least favorite enemy in the game. I get that there are easy ways to deal with them, but at the end of the day, an enemy whose entire gimmick is to silently sneak up on behind you and unleash a one-hit kill attack is just not fun. They're frustrating. They force you to rebuild your shit all the time. They're the sole reason I play with mob griefing off. They're kinda ugly looking. Their drops aren't even that interesting either. With that in mind, is any surprise that I don't like the dimension entirely based around this thing? It feels weirdly underwhelming and overwhelming at the same time. Everything is this ugly shade of green, it all blends in and can be genuinely difficult to traverse. Every mob is relentless and has some flavor of exploding attack. Seriously, 10 minutes into this world and I was already tired of the explosion sound effect. The underground is the most boring we've seen yet, which wouldn't be a huge deal, but they clearly want you to explore it, as there are 3 ore types you need to hunt down for some reason. That feels like quite a lot for how little interesting is down here. The host enemy is cool, I'll give it that. I think I remember back in the day this thing spawned in the overworld actually, and defeating it is how you got access to this dimension. Though, that has been changed. It's cool that they repurposed the monster instead of removing it entirely. Now, if only they could do that with my favorite enemy in the game. We'll get to that later. The structures aren't even interesting either. 3 of them just house an NPC, which most dimensions have anyway, and the 4th is a pretty basic boss platform. I don't know, something about this dimension just doesn't feel finished, and it's probably my least favorite place so far. So by this point, the game kind of assumes that you get the whole process of acquiring realm stones, exploring worlds, upgrading your gear, so inevitably, these places are going to start getting more difficult, starting with Gardencia. Now, I'm starting with this one specifically because I like it, although admittedly I don't have much to say about it compared to some of the other ones. Also, I think I might start actually going to the dimension for these shots, as long as, like, I don't get completely bodied by, like, air mobs, or, like, I don't need a hazmat suit to be in them. Yes, we'll get to that one later. Firstly, this is our wettest dimension yet. Okay, that's a weird way to word it. Basically, what I mean is that this is our first dimension with a substantial amount of water due to it being mostly a series of islands. In fact, it is the first dimension with water at all besides the overworld, unless there's something I'm missing. I think it is, actually. That's a little strange. These islands are very bright and colorful, yet at the same time muted in such a way that nothing really overly fights for your attention. Points of interest stick out pretty prominently too, often being much higher contrasting colors. It's pretty cool. It makes for a color scheme that's interesting yet never overwhelming. As for the structures themselves, they're pretty run-of-the-mill. We have the Lotto Skyflower. Every dimension has a Lotto structure, where these Lotto Men NPCs are held, and they're typically pretty basic. They just trade you, like, these little totem things. In fact, the little banner back at my, like, starting area I actually got from these guys. This is one of these Lotto towers that stands out, though, just for how absurdly tall it is. Like, Christ, look at this. I go as far as saying that this is probably the tallest single structure in the whole entire mod. There's a couple spawn platforms, a couple castles, one housing the boss and the other housing the petal crafting station, which can be used to create a new set of armor. An item you're going to want to craft once you spend some time in this world is called petals. I actually don't like this name. I think it's easy to confuse with like 3 other items from this world alone. You use it both to spawn the boss and to create that armor I just mentioned that I am wearing right now. How you craft this thing is by combining various other petal items, which are dropped from the various enemies of the world. The enemies are, once again, mostly melee mobs, except for these guys, but I do weirdly like these guys a lot, if only because of how off-putting they are to me. All of them are plant-based monsters. You got carnivorous plants, these small root-like monsters, and then you have the ones based off of vegetables and flowers. These actually kind of freak me out a bit. I think it's the fact that their shapes are weirdly upright and, like, human-like. It makes them look almost like people who were turned into monsters, than things that would naturally evolve to live in a place that's mostly water like this. Something about monsters that are living food, or heck, lands made of food for that matter, just kind of freak me out on a conceptual level in general, although I'm certain this will be the last we will see of something like that in this mod. This dimension fits firmly into the extremely fun to explore tier, although truthfully, I feel that it's more from it never doing anything necessarily wrong instead of doing anything exceptional to particularly stand out. With just a few more frustrating elements, or just a bit more variety in its enemies or its loot, it could easily go up or down a tier in my eyes, but I still do enjoy it. I guess my only big issue with this dimension is, I wish the ocean, like, did anything, like, at all. Like, it just kind of exists to separate the islands. There's nothing you can, like, die for. There are no aquatic mobs, for example, you know? And as usual, I wish there was more enemy AI variety. The most we have here are these squash guys that try to leap up and crush down on you, which might be a Plants vs. Zombies reference. You know, it might be cool if they let out like a shockwave as they hit the ground or something. Couldn't emphasize taking a ranged approach to this enemy more. But yeah, that's Gardencia. I like it a lot. Next is Candyland, which,
We found a map to Candy Mountain, Charlie.
Oh boy, I got a lot to say about this one. So, Candyland might be one of the easiest dimensions to get the Realm Stone for. All you have to do is eat a heart fruit while in Precasia. So, with that in mind, you might assume this is one of the easiest dimensions to traverse and collect everything in. No, there's a lot to do in this dimension, and it's all tied together by some amazing set pieces and a large variety of mechanically fun, interesting, and occasionally really dangerous enemies. So dangerous in fact that I have to huddle away in a structure like this in order to not get attacked. Oh god, there's one up there. I am going to lose it if one attacks me in here when I'm just like recording stuff for this script. It's a pretty big wake-up call, honestly. This bright, colorful atmosphere juxtaposed to possibly the most hostile world we've seen yet, and will probably see for a very long time. Let's start with the normal enemies. You have a few melee mobs, and they work rather nicely here from like an enemy AI ratio perspective. You know, let's just go into creative mode for this one. Anyway, let's start with the normal enemies. We have a few melee mobs, and they work rather nicely here from like an enemy AI ratio perspective. They too have that feature the Gardencia mobs have where they look disturbingly upright, almost like transmogrified people or something, and they play off a lot of the ranged mobs pretty well. One of which being the Airhead. These are entirely... Oh, there's one up there. Oh, and there's the other problematic one down there. Airheads are entirely flying units. We've seen a couple of these so far, but what makes these unique is that it will stay as high in the sky as possible and fire pellets at you. They have quite a lot of distance, to be perfectly honest. You can basically only take them out with ranged attacks yourself, which is what I'm trying to get at. Either a bow, a gun, or staff. They also give off this creepy scream when they die. They're a constant threat and make you second guess when you're safe around every corner. But they're not really spammed, so they actually feel quite balanced despite how much of a priority enemy they can be. So I consider them to be pretty well designed. Another monster is the Cherry Blaster. Fun fact, but the bestiaries claims that if you take a bite out of one of these, you will projectile vomit and instantly die, which I think perfectly sets the tone of what to expect from them. Oh, now they don't want to be around me. They too are ranged units, though these ones are actually grounded. Now, that doesn't mean you should try to melee them, because they are constantly launching these enormous explosions at you. These two are a constant threat that make you second guess when you're safe around every corner. And by that I mean every time I turn a corner I see one of these. They are everywhere. You are never safe in Candyland solely because of these things. Weirdly, I kind of like them. This one's flat terrain makes it easy to escape these two enemies, while simultaneously making it more likely to run into them. It also makes it easier to find the structures, which aren't too spectacular, or, oh, those are cute, which aren't too spectacular or unique, but seem quite numerous in a way that you'll constantly be running into something new. I like this world a lot, to a point of which it's our first S-tier world. It's very creative, it's intriguing, I have a lot of questions playing it. It's like weirdly scary. Okay, so about what I mentioned earlier, why I find food disturbing, or I mean like characters or like worlds or like video game levels made out of food disturbing. I was a bit of a picky eater growing up, not in a traditional sense though. I tried just about anything, but something in my autism brain always just got very emotional when food wasn't pristine. Another thing I mostly blame this phobia on is a book I had as a kid called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Some of you might hear that name and think of the animated movie, but it was actually a picture book before that, and some of the images in this book just make me really uncomfortable. Like, seriously, even looking at these illustrations now as a fully grown 28-year-old, I'm still pretty disturbed by some of this. Even more so than most actual horror stuff. Like, food being crushed, thrown, squished, stepped on, made too big, old, misshapen, melted, acting unnaturally, destroying things people love, or otherwise just gross, has this way of making me feel distressed. And food levels and food characters have this way of just tapping into that disturbing nature to me, because you are stepping all over that food. You are squishing those food enemies. There's just a disturbing amount of it, even more so than normal. It gets my brain asking all these, like, weird logistical questions, too. Like, how are these things alive? Like, do they expire? Do they age? Like, how old is this world itself? Can you imagine what this place would smell like after, like, a couple days or something? Hey, on a side note, can some of you please stop requesting I Let's Play Pizza Tower? Just saying. I've actually been talking with some friends about this recently, just for the fun of it. I've come to the conclusion that there are 3 instances where I'm kind of okay with this weird food stuff here. The first being when it kind of validates my feelings by intentionally leaning into the horror. Examples being this very dimension, and stuff like Psychonauts' infamous meat circus level. The second is when the food is stylized in a way that it registers in my mind more as cute adornments than actual food, such as Luncheon from Mario Odyssey or some video game enemies. And the third is when the stage itself is just so fun that I don't really have time to think about anything weird, such as Baroness von Bonbon or many of the food-themed levels from Katamari. But other than that, though, am I the crazy one here? Is this normal? Every time I see a food level or a food character in something, it's always depicted as, like, humorous or cute. Like, I don't get it. Yet, all this may actually be the biggest reason why I especially love Candyland in this game. The monsters are scary, the structures are distressingly large, on top of being really well designed in its own right too. It's a world I like specifically because I just dislike it that much, if that makes sense. I know that's super contradictory, but like, I unironically really like this world because it kind of taps into that deep-seated horror I have for food levels, even more so than pretty much every dimension in this game that's meant to be horror-themed in the first place. It's amazing. Like, I absolutely love Candyland. Our next dimension is called The Haven. This one is very unique. Okay, so after the Tier 1 dimensions, and presumably a couple of the Tier 2 ones, you'd probably expect the difficulty to ramp up even more past this point. This is even our first dimension that exists over a bottomless pit, so you might assume that it would be especially dangerous since you'll have to constantly fight mobs that'll probably want to push you off, you know? But then you realize there were no naturally spawning hostile mobs in the Haven. It kind of caught me off guard. It put me on edge a lot just walking by the mobs that do exist in this dimension that are entirely peaceful. These unicorns and these small mushroom people just look like they're gonna hurt you, but they don't. It's a really unique emotion. That's not to say this dimension is devoid of all challenge, though. It does have hostile mobs, and even a couple bosses. They're just confined to structures or special spawning conditions. And the aforementioned void beneath the entire time is a factor as well. I think this is the only floating island dimension, there really aren't that many, surprisingly, that contain ores, which lead to some perilous climbing to collect everything. There's not much to do here, to be perfectly honest, though that's not necessarily a negative, as the terrain and general design are more the star of the show here anyway. It fits comfortably in the A tier. One last thing worth mentioning is that this was another dimension that used to be radically different. Not because of its terrain generation, though, but because, it used to have enemies. They were pretty annoying to fight, from what I remember, especially those flying things he felt specifically designed to bonk you into the void. The removal of these enemies, for as unintuitive as they may feel from a difficulty curve perspective, gave this world its special little niche and feel that stands out so much among the rest. It was definitely a worthy change. Although, there is one thing of note I think they really missed out on here. This dimension used to be the home of my favorite enemy in the mob. keep this wild, abstract silhouette in mind, because I actually want to talk about this thing a little later, particularly a idea I have in mind as to how this thing could potentially come back. But yeah, that's the Haven. I don't really have much to say about it, but it is a really cool dimension. Before we start the next dimension, I gotta ask, do you guys like clowns? If you wanted to see me as even more of a phobia-based contrarian, I can tell you that my entire life, I've never really been scared of clowns. Like, I don't know, I get how people can find them unsettling on an uncanny valley perspective, but they're literally designed to be humorous. They're exaggerated in such a way to maximize just how dumb they look, given I'm not going to pretend they don't make good villains and monsters, it's just, don't completely rule them out as just being funny little guys, you know? Anyway, here's a dimension with a bunch of clowns trying to kill you. I made it to the clown dimension. I just woke up and this is the first image I've seen today. What the hell are you playing? Minecraft! Welcome to Celeve. This dimension gives me similar vibes to the Haven, actually. Heck, they're even in the same tier. Yeah, let's get out of the way. Like, the Evil Clown dimension is going to be high, right? It's the other floating island dimension. Yeah, there's only 2 of them. That kind of surprised me as well. It also has a thing where there's really not a lot to do here, admittedly, but the atmosphere and the vibes of it does get it, like, pretty high on its own. I like how the bright colors of the enemies makes them stand out against the unsaturated environment. I was kind of surprised by just how desolate and bleak this dimension looked at first, but then I figured that the dimension being bright and colorful would have probably taken a lot away from it. It feels scarier this way, without being too cliche about it. I'd say my least oh god. I'd say my least favorite element here, I'm trying to read my script and run at the same time, is the enemy variety. Yeah, once again, this is once again, it's mostly melee units, though at the very least, these guys look all pretty different from each other. There's something unsettling about an entire army of clowns, rainbow-colored clowns. Ah, darn it. There's something unsettling about an entire rainbow of clowns all staring you down like this. I also gotta respect the audacity to include a pretty useless gun. Okay, I gotta exit my free cam mod, or else it'll crash the game if I do this, but, just listen to this, hold on a second. Isn't that pretty? It does no damage. It just looks cool. Hold on, I think there's actually an upgraded version of this. I never really use this because it's kind of a waste of materials, but, hey, it increases its fire rate. How you doing, buddy? This screams they found, like, a fun particle effect while working on this in development and, like, just had to find a way to put it in no matter what. Get out of here. God, why do they make hissing sounds? Another item we get here is the Gravitator. You can buy it from the Toy Merchant, which is an NPC that can spawn here. It slows your fall descent, which is really useful for exploring some dimensions in this game, particularly a very late game dimension, and is even and you even use this item to get a Realm Stone. It's pretty cool. I like this dimension. So the dimension is a little different, and I can't think of a better way to explain it than to just walk in and, like, show you what happens when you do that. Alright, turn this off. Check this out. Wait, I'm in creative mode. Alright, so let's do that correctly this time. So what just happened? This is the Vox Ponds, a dimension that is a nuclear wasteland. In order to even set foot in this dimension, you need to make a hazmat suit, or else you will constantly take damage from the toxic atmosphere. The hazmat suit is a very ugly armor set and basically gives no armor, so by default, at least until you get a little farther in and unlock the face mask, you are at a severe disadvantage just being in here. This dimension is desolate. The water is gross and sludgy, the trees are dead and hollow. It's a world devoid of all hope, and it leaves a lot of questions to why it's like this. Heck, it could have always been like this for all we know. I mean, there is life here, after all. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing the night vision goggles. It's an item you can get semi-early, and it just makes everything lit up by default. It's really useful for a lot of dimensions in this mod. I'm going to be wearing these for the rest of this, of the Vox Ponds, at least when talking about them out here, so you guys can actually see what this looks like. Like, it somehow looks scarier when you're wearing these. Like, it's hard to explain. But yeah, there is actually life here. Like that little guy over there. Heck, not all of it is even hostile. We got these green shopkeepers with multiple eyes, and oh look, they finally give you a use for poisoned potatoes too. And these tall black and yellow creatures that just kind of wander around. They look quite out of place compared to most mobs here, actually. It gets me wondering if they have anything to do with the lore here. The monsters that are here are pretty cool, though. They're all gross and slimy, as you'd expect, although I couldn't really tell you much about them, as given I had basically no armor while in here, for the most part I ignored combat whenever I could. There is one enemy I was never able to ignore, though. This asshole. This is the Sentinel, and, okay, basically it's a cow with a sad expression and a launcher strapped to its back. It's dangerous for the same reason the Cherry Blaster is. Although I'd say it's even worse here, as the terrain is much harder to traverse, and again, the armor situation. I gotta say, I love its face. It's just a frown. Face the camera, dude, like... Why they never do it when I'm recording? Like, I know the devs are looking into redesigning a ton of mobs in the future, but can you please never change this one? Like, just that face combined with what has got to be, like, top 5 most dangerous enemies in this entire mod. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. It's so silly. Strangely, a lot of the mobs here can also be damaged by the toxic sludge. I don't know if that's an oversight or not, but it gets you thinking. You know, I think there's a lot to say about a portion of a video game that's not necessarily fun, but is important to the overall experience regardless. Say like when a game wants you to feel powerless, or is deliberately slow to hammer in a message. Vox Ponds fits this category very well to me. It's right below the halfway point in the game, and is kind of a wake-up call to how much more dangerous things can become. I'm putting this one in the extremely fun to explore tier, even though it is quite literally the opposite. I don't know, that's just how I named them. And, yeah. Alright, so now we're going to be covering the second half of the Tier 2 dimensions. You might have noticed that I've been pretty positive as of late. The last quarter dimensions ranked pretty darn high and had a lot of good things to say about them as well. This quadrant, however, is the exact opposite. Get ready, folks, because Negative Game Dog is finally here. This is my corruption arc. I'm turning evil! So yeah, I kind of grouped talking about them like, oh wow, it's even turning darker. I kind of grouped, like, the dimensions, like, the order I would cover them in this order for, like, this particular reason, because, like, Part 3 is not going to be a very positive video. Some of my least favorite stuff is going to be covered here. Starting with probably my least favorite dimension in the game, Mysterium. I want to like the Mysterium more than I do. Fantasy mushrooms are always a fun trope, right? And this place is entirely based around that concept. Although, it's just frustrating to traverse, the mobs can be annoying, particularly those flying ones. Some of its structures confuse me pretty hard, and it was the first dimension that made me realize how needlessly dark some of these dimensions can be. Let's start with traversal. It's another dimension that's inside of a cave, similar to the Deeplands. Although unlike the Deeplands, there's some notable elevation to everything. I didn't mention this about the Deeplands, but it's actually pretty unique for its unnaturally flat terrain. Despite being a cave, it's possible to run great distances here, and finding unexplored areas more predictable. This leads to far less downtime where you're digging for minutes on end just looking for anything, really, whether it be structures or just new ground to explore. It serves to make the pacing more enjoyable. Mysterium, on the other hand, has, like, traditional Minecraft cave generation, it seems, just a little bit bigger. It could very well not be, but given how much of my footage is boring digging, you could fool me otherwise. I really hate this one particular enemy, too. The Fungats, I think is how you say it. There are a few flying melee mobs of the sort in this mod, but they're especially frustrating here, as the tight world generation makes them spawn very frequently. They completely blindsided me half the time, especially when trying to mine or platform to higher areas. This dimension doesn't need to be as dark as it is either. I'm gonna take these off for a second. Like, there's no light down here. I mean, it's a cave, I get it, but it's filled with mystical mushrooms, right? I can't help but feel that they should be some kind of light source. Glowing mushrooms are super cool, and could add to the progress by giving the player little beacons to aim for, dotted all over the landscape. Dark dimensions are inherently a little frustrating, but they do have their place. This kinda isn't one of them. Traversal is already difficult enough, I find, and it just kinda feels like it's just dark for the sake of being hard to traverse. There's also some somewhat confusing elements to this dimension as well. Like, say, for example, this dimension has a roof? Cool, I guess, but I was really disappointed to go out there and discover that, like, it's still dark as hell out here? It appears to be nighttime forever, but I was at least expecting, like, some moonlight or something. Or heck, maybe like a mushroom-shaped moon that, like, glows or something. I don't know, I just want glowing dimensions so this place is easier to traverse, you know? Like, genuinely, make the mushrooms underground in the sky glow a little bit, pop some holes in the ceiling, and I genuinely think this might come together for a real visual treat of a world. Right now, it's just, like, a dark cave with, like, just darkness up top as well, you know? This is actually another dimension that used to have a radically different terrain generation, and it was the weirdest generation I've ever seen. For lack of a better way to word it, it looked bugged. It was mostly a flat surface dotted with these huge holes that legitimately looked like chunk errors and went straight down to water. Constantly getting bonked down by fungrats and having to slowly climb your way back up was practically the gimmick of the world. It was very unpleasant, and while I have my issues with what it is now, I'm pretty glad that they changed this. Oh, hi there. I got one other note, and it's not so much a negative, but just something I find kind of weird. But this is the... Oh, hi there. This is the only dimension in the game where one of its structures is a portal to a whole-ass other dimension. Runador, which, fun fact, my autocorrect changed to Run Adorably. I like Runador, though we're not talking about it quite yet. It's just unique to see passage to another dimension work in this way, instead of being able to get it to it via a realm stone. I mean, you can make a realm stone for Runador, though it requires you to access the world through Mysterium first, so for all intents and purposes, this is how you access it. But yeah, aside from finding that interesting, I just wasn't really a super big fan of this one. Next we have the Abyss, a dimension based around blood and gore. Everything is caked in red, the mobs all look demonic, the trees have eyeballs in them, and the environment is, in the wiki's words, dotted with gore-based plants and foliage. Absolutely horrific. It's like something straight out of Harvester or the Crimson from Terraria. Too bad it's difficult to appreciate due to how dark everything is, though. Yeah, this is another dimension where my biggest issue is how needlessly dark everything is. And, weirdly, it won't be the last as well. Like I said earlier, dark levels do have their place, but this is another example where it doesn't really feel like it adds anything. If anything, it takes away. In a dimension with such a visual and offensive style, I can't think of any greater injustice to it than to make it so you can't see the grass right in front of your face half the time. I gotta wonder if expecting the player to wear these goofy-ass glasses or... Oh, hi, I gotta wonder if expecting the player to wear these goofy-ass glasses or spending thousands of resources on torches are really part of the artistic vision with some of these dimensions. I swear, like, half of the game I'm wearing these goggles, more than my intended actual helmet for my actual armor. The game might be a bit aware of this, because, like, it does stack with your armor sets, and I don't think it really takes away from your bonuses, but it still feels kind of silly. Anyway, this dimension does have some really creative elements to it. For one, I love the mobs. They all look terrifying, especially the Web Reaper, which I elect as the single scariest mob in the entire game. They're huge, and they have a striking silhouette that catches your attention from a distance, even when things are super dark. They're especially scary too when you need to enlarge one or to receive a boss summoning item. It feels like just about every one of them can inflict some kind of status ailment on you, and it's typically a different status ailment too. It's pretty unique, and it definitely serves to make some more dangerous than others, and gives you an incentive to prioritize certain ones. I also like this one, I forgot the name right now, but like they kind of copy themselves and only a certain one is real. It's kind of cool. You can also find Bloodstone here, underground, which is a resource for many useful items. One of the most interesting ones to me being the Wither Armor, which is what I'm wearing right now. It looks kind of factory default. I bet you they just haven't really retextured it yet. This suit not only makes you immune to wither damage, but gives you a defense boost when you are inflicted by it. Situational armor is always interesting in games like this. A criticism I do have with this dimension is I find the structures to be quite boring. One is for the Lotto Man, you have like an underground thing that contains a pretty bad crop, 2 enemy spawners, and 2 boss spawners. That's pretty much it. Both the methods for getting the boss items are pretty cryptic and annoying as well, although, like I said earlier, one of them does have you do something kind of cool. Another large issue is the color palette. It's mostly red, which makes sense given the theming, although it's more along the lines of a Deeplands as opposed to a Lelyetia in terms of how well it pulls this off. Deep red homogenizes so hard of itself, and that's not even considering the thick red fog covering your vision the entire time. And that's even when you can see everything. Like, a lot of structures and things you want to watch out for just blend in when you're running around. It makes it very hard to traverse. Yeah, I guess, though. It's a neat dimension with some incredible ideas, but it just has some glaring elephants in the room to me as well. Mostly having to do with visibility, and I wish there was just more variety in the structures. It's a definite contender for the something's missing tier, but it wouldn't have to do much to be bumped up a tier. Next is Iromine. Imagine I woke up one morning, excited to play Advent of Ascension, but one dimension overnight just disappeared from the game. Iromine is the single most dimension where if it were the unlucky dimension to vanish in this scenario, it would probably take me the longest to notice. It's a dimension I ultimately find forgettable for whatever reason. I couldn't even really tell you why I feel this way. It could be that most mobs are a little too similar again, it could be the boring terrain generation, it could be the underwhelming structures. Heck, it could even be a me thing, as I entered this dimension pretty late in my playthrough, so maybe I just found it all underwhelming compared to some of the other ones I've seen, and I was also maybe feeling a little burnout. I really couldn't say. Like, oh, hi there. That's the sound they make? Like, I don't know, man, something about this place just doesn't do it for me. I can tell you it's probably not the color palette that disinterests me, though. It's very striking, golden yellow and deep black, very bold colors that absolutely stand out. Although, while these colors are strong, their impact diminishes a lot when everything uses it, including pretty much every mob and structure. The mobs, once again, mostly use the same identical melee AI we've seen so much. The only one that even remotely stands out to me are these flying guys, and these guys that cause lightning to strike whenever they hit you. Remember earlier when I mentioned this enemy that used to be in the Haven? Meet the Orbiter, my favorite enemy in the mod, that was removed when the Haven was purged of hostile naturally spawning mobs. It looks so cool to me. I love these weird abstract monster designs. I love the sound it makes. It has this gimmick where it fluctuates your gravity when you're near it and tries to kill you with fall damage and also kind of hold you in place so other mobs can kill you. It's very unique. For context, the Shulker is my favorite enemy from normal Minecraft, so I guess I just have a soft spot for monsters that screw with your gravity. Hear me out. Take this enemy, recolor it, and put it here. Like, in this dimension. Say that it lifts you up with electromagnetism or something, and it'd probably be a pretty dangerous pair to a lot of already existing monsters here. I don't know, it's just kind of a thought I had when playing this. The structures are small and not very eventful. So small, in fact, that something just feels very off about them to me. Aside from the boss spawner, they're all just tiny rooms containing either mob spawners or an NPC. One that confused me a lot even was this one called the Iro Passage, which is pretty much just a tube. Like, you go in one end, there's some stuff inside, and then you go out the other. Call me crazy here, but these tiny structures almost feel like they're supposed to be chained together into a big mega structure. Like, you can imagine that, right? It got me thinking about, what if these hallways stretched across huge expanses of land, connecting these other structures like giant tubes? That'd be fun to follow them and give you an easier way to find points of interest, and be a memorable, unique element to this world as well. Probably my favorite thing about this dimension is the Professor NPC, but honestly, it's only because it's my second favorite way to make money besides the mineralization station. Iromine isn't necessarily a bad dimension, but it just seriously needs something, anything more. As of right now, it's just easily the most forgettable dimension in the mod to me. I really don't care to return. I'm sorry. Crystevia. You know, I got pretty negative feelings towards this one too, although it's not so much because of the enemies or the terrain generation or any other common reason I've gone over thus far, aside from maybe the darkness, but I feel it's more justified here because it's very easy to traverse and is literally just a cave, so like that would explain why it's so dark, although some big glowing crystal elements for similar logic to glowing mushrooms would be super cool. I mean, they do glow, but like, can you even, like, make out what's down there? Yeah, I'm just gonna put these on for this one, too. There we go, that's a lot better. Yeah, it's purple. It looks cool. I really like the look of this one, actually. No, my biggest issue with this dimension is I found myself checking the wiki and opening my menu to rearrange my items and getting confused by said items all of the frickin' time. So, Crystevia has this gimmick where there are a few items that come in 6 color varieties. You have the druzes, cool unique word to use by the way, you have the crystals, and you have the gemstones. All of which can come from completely different sources and have wildly different functions and uses. This was the dimension that made me really wish I had more inventory space the most. Any opening of the menu looked like if you gave every synergy key item to the same Golden Sun character and just didn't organize it. Are these the ones that act as quasi-currency, or is it these ones? Are these the ones that convert into other ones? Which one of these make the boss item again? It gets even more confusing when you realize some of these are used for crafting recipes, and then things you can craft sometimes require something you can craft from the things you craft. It just left me very overwhelmed and disinterested in really wanting to dive deep and engaging with this world. Or wanting to acquire just about anything you can get in this place. Assembling a rainbow of assets that come together into something cool, and it even emphasizing this by color-coding some of the enemy drops, it's cool. It's a neat concept in theory, it really should work, but it just felt like too much to keep track of. I really like what the dimension is going for here, but it just doesn't come together very well. It makes it a pretty low pick for me, personally. And that's the last of the Tier 2 dimensions. I want to emphasize again that I kind of deliberately chose to group a ton of dimensions I wasn't particularly a fan of, just to conveniently have them all in one place. Like, take the Band-Aid off all at once, if you will. And also to emphasize, just because something is super low doesn't mean it's devoid of creative elements or artistry. I guess a good way to put it is to just remember that there's a difference between bad and, like, least favorite. Some of these are quite well designed, but just have elements that I personally do not like. And heck, I might be in the minority here, and folks could very well enjoy the dimensions I placed very low here. Comment below if you did, maybe I just missed something with a few of them. Starting with the Tier 4 dimensions, we have Runador. Runador is pretty interesting. As mentioned earlier, it's the only world that isn't first accessed via a realm stone, but via a structure in another world, instantly making it stand out before you even set foot in here. As for the dimension itself, it's quite blue. The wiki describes it as being filled with many strange beings and magical structures, though I think a simpler way to word it would be to say that it is fantasy-themed. For mobs, we have stuff like unicorns, fairies, and knights in shining armors, a couple abstract ones which are really fun. Speaking of blue, we have another dimension where most of its assets share a unifying color, and this one pulls it off extremely well. There's a lot of different shades of blue represented here, and everything has a unique silhouette from each other. It's a beautiful dimension, frankly. One criticism I do have with this dimension is I find the terrain generation and structures boring. The generation is hilly, pretty identical to many other dimensions, and doesn't do a lot to make itself stand out. Aside from, I guess, maybe how low the clouds are, that's a bit interesting. Yeah, like, that down there is, like, where you start the dimension, like, that kind of Y level. It's it's kind of strange how low the clouds are here. I wonder if there's, like, a story reason for that. Okay, I guess we have clouds in our face now. Something about it feels a little too natural somehow, too. I can't help but feel that it might look cool with castle pieces or minor structures dotted everywhere, given that, you know, it is fantasy-themed in a way. The existing structures aren't anything you haven't seen before either. You got your typical Lotto Man structure and enemy spawner. This structure is literally just a platform. You walk up, grab the item in the center, and just leave. The item in question being the Rune Randomizer, which is actually a pretty fun item. So cool, in fact, that I kind of wish you could get it earlier. It probably would have led to me experimenting with weapons that use runes as ammunition more. There's this one other that I think is supposed to spawn underground, but I literally never found one. Oh, and speaking of the underground, mining for elecanium is excruciating. I really hated having to do that. There is one really unique boss spawner, however. It's a 2-story castle that I swear they intended for you to find a way to cheese the said boss using its geometry. It's actually kind of interesting. This boss almost felt like a puzzle because of this. Now, again, I'm not really a big fan of the bosses in this dimension, so when I do bring one up like this, it's typically a good thing, you know? It stands out. This is a neat dimension. I just wish it had something a little extra to make it really, like, stick out from a lot of other ones. You can do so much of a fantasy setting like this, and while I love what's here so far, it feels like it barely scratches the surface of what you can do with a concept like this. And with that palette cleanser out of the way, let's talk about my favorite dimension in the game. So, we're talking about a dimension that's mechanically interesting, visually stunning, a place I spent hours even when I was completely done with it, despite the fact that you can't breathe by default or even see. It's just that fun to explore. Welcome to Lunalus. This is a dimension based on outer space, essentially taking place in the void. But scattered all around you in every direction are these giant asteroids. They're numerous, and they're not just for show, as they'll frequently be dotted with ores, ice, netherrack, even little spawner rooms. They feel almost ripped out of the overworld, like bits of what we've seen and are familiar with rearranged and contorted into something quite strange. A rare type of asteroid are these ones with little ecosystems inside them that spawn monsters that are a reference to Commander Keen. It's not often you see direct references like that. It's kinda cool, actually. It's weirdly chill just to equip something like, say, the Gravitator and float around in space. There's something surprisingly surreal about it. It's a ton of fun, although all of this pales in comparison, though, to my single favorite structure in the entire mod, the Zal ship. This structure is simply magnificent. It's so large that I swear the wiki page for it alone is longer than it is for some entire dimensions. When I saw of these things creeping into my draw distance, I was both intimidated and excited. Walking up to the entrance and seeing a naturally spawning piston door was a pretty surreal first impression, too. And then, I wasn't expected to take me like an entire half hour to explore everything. The ship has it all. Every conceivable function a sci-fi crew would need has a place here. A control room, a sleeping quarters, a meeting room, storage, even tons of alien technology. The place is run by these guys, the Zals. They look almost robotic, though I like to believe they are biological, if only because you can also see children running around here. They're pretty friendly too. Many of them will even do trades with you, although they do incarcerate tons of prisoners and probably engage in slave labor, so they're not perfect. Weirdly, I like how you're not really able to interact with them that much. Most of them just give off a single one-liner. That's more often than not are them being weirded out by you. it made me feel like the protag was just too nervous to say anything back or question what they are. Or maybe we've seen so much at this point that this doesn't even faze the protagonist. It really isn't often I think much about the player character's opinions in a game like this, so it was actually a very surreal experience. If I did have one criticism with this dimension, it's that yet again, it's another one that feels needlessly dark. I mean, the space has light, right? I mean, heck, here's one right here. Like, look at this world thumbnail they use on the wiki. That's not a world thumbnail. That's a graphic I use when I need to censor something in a video. Oh, that's a penis. There's also this strange mechanic involving the boss. Most bosses you have to manually summon with like an item or something, but the boss of this world is only one in the game that can spawn randomly. I'm actually not against this. Also, let's put these back on. I'm actually not against this. It's unique in a fun way, but there's also some pretty annoying flaws with how it works. There's not really a rhyme or reason to how it spawns when it does, and given how open space is, it can sometimes be impossible to find. The boss music also kicks in every time it appears, and while it is a good theme, it doesn't really work as something you hear frequently as almost a random encounter theme. The first time I ever found a Zal ship, it spawned outside the structure, and I think it kept floating in and out of when it counts as, like, present, which had this theme starting and stopping constantly as I was just trying to explore this thing, and it was pretty immersion-breaking. Again, I kind of like the idea of a randomly spawning boss, but I do wish there were more stipulations to avoid awkward situations like this. Other than those two issues, though, absolute masterpiece of a world, easily my favorite part of the entire mod. The next dimension is the Greckon. Okay, I don't know why, but when I was playing around this part of the game, and even when I was writing this part of the script, I found myself constantly confusing stuff from this dimension with stuff from the Abyss. Has anyone else ever had that issue? My best guess to why is because they both have a vague horror theme to them. They also have very similar terrain generation, and are even both pretty darn dark normally. I will say, of the two, I think I do prefer the Greckon slightly more, though. For one, it's a little bit easier to traverse, mostly because, like, you know, the palette isn't as gratingly red, and the structures are a bit more unique. I like the structures just a little bit more. It also has my favorite designed enemy in the mod, the Grill Face. This monster also has a funny gimmick where it can jump scare you on hit. This place also has Bane, probably my favorite boss in the game. Like, I don't know, I just love the gimmick and chaos it can provide. It's just fun, which is definitely notable given my typical opinion on the bosses in this. You can also get the Ghoulish armor here, which is a set I use right up until the end of the game. Dare I say it's probably my favorite armor in the mod. It's an okay dimension. Honestly, though, it does feel difficult to place it any higher than the Something's Missing tier, however, only because it just feels like a cooler Abyss, and the Abyss I already had pretty mixed feelings on anyway. That and, like, this is probably the least amount I'm ever going to say about any dimension in this video. Like, I just really don't have much to say about the Greckon. I really wish it did more that was just unique to itself, whether that be a different terrain generation, more emphasis on its forest, more unique structures. I do enjoy what's here, though. I just wish there was something a bit more unique to it. My first exposure to the next dimension started in a pretty funny way. It's Laborian, a dimension based around aquatics, so like the ocean and ocean life. Now, you know how I sometimes mention how a few dimensions used to have radically different terrain generation? Well, this is another example of that. I never got this far on my original 2020 playthrough, but I remember from screenshots and videos I saw of it that it tended to be flat, bright, and colorful. Kinda cool, right? So with this in mind for this playthrough, I built my portal, I walked in, and I was confused when I immediately saw the oxygen meter. Did I spawn underwater? That would have been pretty appropriate, I guess, but maybe I should get to land. Gosh, this whole place seems kind of dark too, so I guess it's another dimension I'm wearing these for the whole time. As I swam around aimlessly though, even by some admittedly wild mobs, suddenly it hit me what was going on. This dimension was no longer a bunch of islands surrounded by oceans. This dimension was the ocean. The entire dimension is underwater now. I was like, oh god, I can't do anything here right now. And I exited the portal, to which I was almost so surprised when a bunch of stuff exploded behind me. Immediately, I think this is some kind of glitch. I don't know why, but leaving specifically Laborian in particular occasionally causes mobs to spawn and randomly explode. Anyway, I got actually prepared for this, then dived in, and it was a surreal experience. Although not particularly a fun one. I want to be real here, but I don't find swimming fun in Minecraft. Yes, even after the big water update that changed everything about how it worked. Trust me, it is a lot better than it used to be, but there's still so much I find cumbersome and frustrating about it. Constantly jolting up and down as you swap from walking in water mode to swim mode, how hard it can be to get your bearings when deep underwater, when it's super dark. It's something I wish the game as a whole just did a lot better. This is frustrating, though. This is actually the last dimension in the bottom tier, by the way, but it sucks because it's not necessarily the mod's fault. This is a really creative, unique concept for a dimension, but it's just also a concept that's fighting an uphill battle by default. Let's talk about some positives, though. The mobs are really cool. A thing I love about deep sea aesthetic is how creepy and alien some of the creatures can look, and this world has some mobs that really lean into that terrifying uncertainty. There are also these merman guys that give me the feeling that this world is being lived in some kind of way. Breathing civilizations the same way, say, the Lelytians did. These small castle structures are super fun, too. I love some of the armor here too. The Hydroplate set gives you regen when you are touching water, which is not only great for this dimension, obviously, but lets you do this trick where you can place a water bucket down and snipe enemies from the center and just about anywhere you can place water. The Arculus helmet is great too. It provides its own oxygen, essentially making it a flat upgrade to the face mask. This dimension just has great loot overall. So, in conclusion, I don't hate this dimension, but it is going to be in the bottom tier, if only because I just don't really like water in Minecraft that much and swimming mechanics that much, but it is a very creative and interesting and, like, really well put together dimension regardless. Oh, it also has these things too. Yeah, that's an enemy. Ah! We're in the home stretch here. This is the second to last dimension of the game. Welcome to Dustopia. I love the name. It's a cool play on words on dystopia. Now, I might sound like a broken record here when I say that my biggest issue with this dimension is how dark it is. Although, I feel like I'm more justified than ever here, as visibility in this dimension is so bad that it's mentioned several times on the wiki. Look at this image. Would you believe me if I told you that this is a screenshot where the player has night vision? Can you even see me here? Like, I'm over on this corner. You can't see anything here. Oh my god. When I put on the night vision goggles, it's still difficult to see. It's just the entire place is dark gray. For the record, if we're actually counting here, there are 9 dimensions where it's dark by default, to a point at which I feel inclined to always wear the night vision goggles. That's about half. Again, I don't have an issue with a dark dimension inherently. Deeplands is pretty dark, and it makes sense as it adds the small meta where you place down torches to reveal the cave and a fog of war effect. Vox Ponds is designed to look desecrated and apocalyptic. Turning on night vision for the first time gives you this chill as you realize just how desolate it is, and genuinely that's a powerful moment of the mod. But for every dimension where the darkness adds something artistic, there's like 2 or 3 where it feels completely unnecessary and actively takes away from the experience to me, as I either need to focus all my efforts on lighting or wear these immersion-breaking goggles with this ugly green vignette. I'm not even joking when I say by endgame, whenever I made armor in this mod, I genuinely contemplated not even making helmets anymore, because what's the point? For half of my playthrough, I am wearing these goggles. Like, seriously, playing half the game with a distracting filter if you're going for completion? What is this, Crash Bandicoot 4? Like, I don't know, am I just missing something here? Anyway, as for unique stuff to Dustopia, we have some pretty wild mobs. Most of them are melee units, but they're all these abstract and creepy shapes. There's some good color design here too, whereas most of the world is grayscale, most enemies have some bits of red on them or white on them to make them easily spot and fight at a distance. given you have night vision. The Crucifix probably have my favorite design in all of the mobs here. There's also these primordial villages. I've talked a couple times about NPCs, but these ones are especially notable to me because they're where you can obtain the energistic equipment. They have this cool gimmick where you can charge them to make them mine more efficiently. I'm not really a fan of how most of the structures are just boxes with mobs inside of them, though there's kind of a lore reason, interestingly enough. They're locked up, according to the Primordial Guide. Always love little lore bits like this. But yeah, there are certainly elements to this dimension I enjoy, but the visibility issue is so prevalent. I do care to go back, it's certainly not in that tier, but I guess missing something is an appropriate place for it. It's missing something, alright, and if you can't see what it's missing... I was gonna end this one with a joke, but I don't know, like, you just can't see, okay? And then I have to use him to jump on, and then, who's this? Oh, what? Is this safe for work? And now we're finally here, the last dimension of the mod. Welcome to the Shyrelands. It's the last top-tier dimension. Yeah, we're starting with the tearing at the start of the section again this time. They went all out with this final world. It looks cool, it's fun to explore, the enemies are interesting and creative, the loot is sublime, even the boss isn't that bad. I describe it as a dimension based around holiness and light, some kind of sparse forest within a heaven analog. It's kind of beautiful, honestly. Yellow and turquoise make for a gorgeous color scheme. The enemies and structures follow this color scheme as well, and they're also great in general. The monsters take a large variety of shapes and strategies. They got the worms that disguise themselves as flowers, the biblically accurate angels, those guys who weaken you if you're in their vicinity. I love how different they can be too. It leaves you prioritizing different monsters depending on the situation for some truly dynamic combat. That's something I've kind of been wanting the whole game, basically. The structures are big and bold. There's tons of them, and even the ones that are more or less just decorations stand out and are fun to explore. Hi, I'm way up here now. One particular structure I find very interesting are the Shire Pillars. Okay, so a lore thing with this dimension is that it's actually held up by these giant pillars. That's why the Y value for the basic ground level is so high up. I personally got pretty invested in these pillars as, when I traveled to this dimension, my spawn just happened to be one, to be on top of one. So I spawned basically underground. This was just goofy and completely unintended, although it did make me probably the first person to ever make a bubble elevator in the Shyrelands. Bye! My one issue with this place is I hate mining for Shire Stone and Shire Gem ores. There's basically no underground to this dimension, as due to how high up it is and how much below of it is air, the crust is pretty thin. You think that would make it easy to mine for these resources, but I find they're so rare that you're just mining in a straight line for on and on. Like, all of this is man-made, and I swear, like, not much was found in here. Inevitably being the final world, the loot here is amazing. Lots of bows, guns, the biggest sword you have ever seen in your life. The Pickaxe is actually overpowered. It mines in like a 3x3 radius, which might not sound that crazy, but like it is absolutely ludicrous how much ground you can cover with this pickaxe. Also, is it just me, or does the knight armor look exactly like Tim's armor from Minecraft Story Mode? I kind of wonder if that was intentional, or if that was like another reference, you know? The last thing I'd like to talk about is that this is another dimension that used to have a very different world generation. And this one is kind of wild. Basically, the world consisted of a bunch of rooms. Like a bunch of square rooms. This was entirely scrapped. I think the reason being because it conflicted with structure generation too much. It's a very valid reason, though I kind of miss it in a way. It's so unique and unlike anything I've ever seen in this mod, or even from Minecraft in general. I wish this style of building could have been preserved in some kind of way, like maybe some kind of enormous labyrinth structure consisting of it. I don't know, it's a thought. But overall, though, this was an amazingly designed final world. It's pretty straightforward, all things considered, but still manages to contain tons of nuance and creative decisions. Easy top tier here. And that's all of them. God, I love this mod. Hi! Hey, buddy! What? Bye! Don't go to Laborial, please. Advent of Ascension is an incredible time. It's an absolute blast of a mod to play. It's a mod with so much love and care put into it, and everything from its scope to its history, it really shows, you know? Like, this is something with a lot of dedication behind it. The devs are still working on it actively, though, to a point in which, by the time this video goes up, some of the stuff I talk about might be very well outdated. I still hope you enjoyed the video, though. Definitely give it a like or a comment if you did, or a share, because that sort of thing really does help engagement with these big videos that take me forever to make. And I'll leave a link to the wiki for this mod as well in the description below, if you're kind of curious about yourself and would like to learn more, whether it be a download yourself or even to join the community of the game to keep up with updates for it. But yeah, I think that is it for this video. God, as per usual with my essays, this took a little longer than expected, but I am so happy to finally be done with it. I would like to give a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Royalbot Sean and Great Wolf and Firestriker. Thank you all for your support as well, and I will see you folks later. Thanks for watching.